Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here today, Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave, this is Olive, and we talk about books and some other things. So it is hot today, so I don't know how long Olive's going to make it. She's getting sleepy, but she's going to do her best, right, Olive? Going to do your best. It is really hot. So here we go again, another controversial one. So I'm going to say what I said a couple months ago when we reviewed the book Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney. We up until this year, we steered away from anything controversial like the plague. Coming in 2024, it was a conscious decision we were going to make that we made that we are no longer going to be scared to talk about controversial things. The whole reason, or one of the main reasons we talk about books, is the messaging they provide and the relevance to our real lives, and so we're not going to be scared to talk about nonfiction books that deal with controversial topics. So this one, maybe not quite so controversial, but the ending of this video will certainly be controversial. So the book that we are talking about today is How Democracies Die. So we read a couple books on vacation. This is one of them, but we thought this book deserved its own dedicated video. So this book, How Democracies Die, was published in 2018 by, let's say my old man eyes here, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. It gets hard with the glare. So, okay. And so there's two Harvard professors that have studied democracy for a couple of decades. And so this book was fascinating, both in terms of its its historical perspective and in terms of the quite a few examples that it gives of democracies dying, and also of its particular relevance today and what we're living through right now. And so the book was it's not like a dry history book. It does it very palatably and just goes through a lot of different examples, because I think that one of the things that when we hear a lot of hyperbole and a lot of hysteria in the news and things that like democracy's at stake and this and that, and I think a lot of people are, we've all grown up in a relatively, like everybody alive today watching this video has pretty much grown up in a relatively stable, at least if you're here in the U.S., has grown up in a relatively stable, functioning democracy. And so, like a lot of things, we think, is democracy falling? That's not something that could never happen here. That only happens in other places. And this book, one of the great things that it does, it gives you some real perspective on that, and it makes you realize how easily it does happen and how it can happen here, and the odds are that eventually it would happen here. We have to keep in mind, you always have to put things in perspective. We have to keep in mind that the U.S. is not even 250 years old. That's not that long. 150 years ago, big things happened, right? 160 years ago, we were in a civil war in this country. So the idea of there being some event or individuals that can undermine our democratic institutions is not so crazy when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. And as this book illustrates, it's something that's actually to be expected given enough time. We are also, it depends how you define a democracy, but generally, we are currently the oldest existing democracy at under 250 years. Our Constitution was 1789, and so what is that? My math's going to be bad today, but 230 something, right? Anyway, a little over 200 years, not that long amount of time, and that is the oldest surviving democracy. We are due for something to happen, because it almost always does. You look at the top 10 oldest democracies in the world today, the next 9 out of the top 10 are all less than 200 years, between 100 and 200 years old. So this book sort of takes you through, one of the things it does is takes you through a lot of historical examples of democracies falling. It takes you through examples of it happening and not happening and why. So, as I said, the first thing is it takes you through a lot of different examples. Everybody always throws around Hitler when they're going to talk about a horrible autocrat in history. But Hitler is far from the only one. It happens everywhere in both hemispheres, all continents. And so, there are a number of examples in here. There's some from Europe, but there's also examples here for a lot of countries, like let's say in Latin America, in the Philippines, that had successful democracies, and that had democracies that were some of them in large part modeled on our own constitution, and in some cases almost exactly like our constitution, and shows you how it's our constitution itself isn't the thing that keeps democracy together. It can't do it by itself. It's a good system, but that system has to be employed properly, or else democracy will fall. And it takes you through a lot of examples of different autocrats in all different places: Chile, Peru, Venezuela, the Philippines, like I said, some in Europe, even modern day. Different autocrats that have risen and at least have partially or completely undermined the democratic system, such that the democracy literally, at least in part, fell, so that you have a partial autocracy, or completely fell. And it's happened in a number of different places, and it's happened with people in places with constitutions, like I said, very similar to ours. And this walks you through a lot of those different examples. It also walks you through how it happens. It shows you the places, it shows you a bunch of examples where it did happen. It also shows you some examples where it didn't happen, and why it didn't happen, why it did or didn't happen in those places. And believe it or not, in the relative modern age, it's not, democracies don't generally fall with coups and violent uprisings. They fall in other ways, and it generally seems to follow the same kind of pattern. And this book talks a lot about that. It talks about the pattern that almost virtually always starts with a figure touting populism, right? And it's always a demagogue that is playing to people's emotions and fears and prejudices, to get people riled up, and that is how the individual comes to power. It always starts with a populist platform, and then once that leader gets into some position of power, they start implementing certain things, certain procedures, and they start engaging in certain types of behavior. And what it shows is that some places this hasn't, where it hasn't been stopped, is because there are certain norms that go along that leaders and politicians abide by, certain norms that go along with the written constitutional form of government. And these norms of just respecting certain aspects of the institutions, and respecting results, and respecting opponents, even those that everybody vehemently agrees with. When those norms are violated, when the populist leader, the demagogue, is able to make others violate those norms, that's what enables them to firmly seize power and turn a democracy upside down into an autocracy. And so it's really fascinating book, with all the examples that it gives you, and all the stuff that it walks through, that each of these leaders, particular leaders that did, some of which, I mean, I like to think myself a relatively educated person, but some of these I didn't know about. Some of these people I hadn't heard of. And it walks you through them and what they did, and it's really very fascinating. And so now we come to the controversial part of it is so incredibly pertinent to today, what is happening to today in the U.S., and in particular, a particular autocrat that we see on the rise. So this is the part of the video, as with that other controversial one that I did, this is the part of the video where I mention that I am a Republican, always vote Republican, and a Republican that happens to believe that Donald Trump is a very clear and present danger to our democracy. He is one of these individuals that's talked about in the book and exhibiting all the same behaviors and is on a trajectory to become an effective autocrat. And this book, a lot of this book is the history of all those other places that I told you about. But later in the book, it does talk about Trump and how the same pattern applies to Trump. And the interesting thing about this book is that this book was published in 2018. This was shortly after Donald Trump was elected in 2016. So this was just like when some of his behaviors were starting to get exhibited. But it's so telling because of the patterns that they give you and talk about in this book have just further come to fruition over these recent years. They didn't, the authors of this book, when they wrote it, didn't see some of what Trump would evolve into yet at that time. They just saw early signs of it. And but even at the time that they wrote this, they talked about those early signs and that this was a danger that was coming, that he was exhibiting. He was the rare but occasional autocrat that rises to power through these populist means and then starts behaving in certain ways once he gets that power of a large portion of society, engages in these other behaviors. And it's a lot, so much of it is coming true. These sort of things that all these populist leaders do. They all talk about the corruptness of the existing government or the establishment, and how they are going to bring the power back to the people, that they're fighting for you. They begin to vilify everyone that disagrees with them. They vilify the other side. They delegitimize their opponents. They call their opponents criminals. I mean, think about this. This is becoming normalized now in this country, in the U.S., but it was not like this not that long ago. It was not like that. And so this sort of behavior is becoming, Donald Trump is normalizing this sort of behavior, vilifying and vilifying opponents, questioning the integrity of elections. These are all a lot of these early behaviors that start to happen. Or not even necessarily early, but behaviors that happen during an autocrat's rise. And so, this book was it was very chilling. It was very chilling to read, and as I said, I thought it was particularly relevant to today. This is another one of those books that I think anybody, especially anybody in the U.S., should read this today, and I think it helps give a little more insight in a historical framework, gives you a little more insight into what is happening, and what is happening with the rise of this particular leader, Donald Trump. I don't think it's an exaggeration. Like I said, I think there are more and more Republicans that are starting to feel this way. As with the last video, I know with this video, I'm going to get some hate. I know I'm going to get some unsubs, and that's okay. You do you. I would like to think that everybody can talk about these sort of things. That's part of the danger when we're not able to talk about them. People are so polarized and so angry and so fearful that they can't even talk about these things. They don't see a rising threat, and so, I like the last video. This video does not have any discussions of political policy or political positions, but I'll still get a bunch of comments, from both ends. I'll get some hate from both ends, and I'll still get a lot of comments that are political in nature and start arguing about political policy. That's what happened last time. So you can't stop that. But I guess what I want to leave you with is why I think this book is so important. What this book talks about is not political policy. It talks about autocrats and how autocrats undermine democracy, independent of political positions. That has nothing to do with it. It talks about autocrats who use populism and then engage in certain behaviors to undermine a democracy and turn it into an autocracy, and how we are very likely seeing that happen right now in the U.S. And the parallels that it shows you are just pretty astonishing. And so I don't know if my camera just went off, so I hope not. But I would highly, highly recommend this book. And yeah, so be curious to hear your comments if you've read it or if you plan to read it. And like I always say, respectful comments are welcome, but please let's try to keep it at that. So thank you so much for watching. If you have anything substantive to say, but you want to leave Olive a puppy emoji, she does always like to see those. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again very soon. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.